So as we've been talking about these different events over the last several weeks, for the most part we've been in the Gospel of John, but today we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 28. It's going to be one of those passages that we've heard a lot, especially if you've ever been in mission circles. Everybody tends to go to Matthew 28 to talk about missions, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. So probably the events that are happening here in Matthew 28 are probably a couple of 3 weeks after the event that Kyle talked about last week, where Jesus met with 7 of the disciples on the beach by the sea. That they had gone out to fish. He was there to give them fish and to give them breakfast. And really, it was kind of a reassurance, especially to Peter, that all that Peter had done didn't disqualify him. You know, Jesus had told him it was going to happen. He didn't believe it was going to happen. And then when it happened, he was upset with himself, upset with what was going on. And yet, Jesus gives him an opportunity once again to say, you know what? You blew it. And it wasn't just for Peter. All of them had blown it. I mean, Peter was the one who denied him verbally, but all of them ran away and left him with the exception of John. And so they'd all denied him in some form or fashion. But today we're going to read in Matthew chapter 28, beginning of verse 16. It says, Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the earth. So as we look at this passage, again, it's a kind of a familiar passage to us. But I want us to kind of look a little bit differently at it today than we normally would as far as for missions and those kind of things. So let's go back in verses 16 and 17. It says, Now the 11 disciples, why are there 11? Judas is gone, okay? So now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, so we start with, some doubted. So what's the idea here? You know, first off, it says that they went to a mountain. If you read through the book of Matthew, Matthew is very prominent in discussing mountaintops. So you have the mount on the Sermon on the Mount. You have the Sea of Galilee, the different times where he's sitting on the mountain and he's drawing them to a mountain. And so part of that is because Matthew is talking to the Jews. And if we think about the Jews, all the significant events in Jewish life happened on a mountaintop. You have Mount Sinai and the giving of the law. You have Mount Horeb and the reiteration of the covenant. You have Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, where one is for announcing curses, one's announcing blessings. So there's all these different things. And so Matthew, in talking to the Jews, is prominently talking about different mountaintop experiences. And so now we have Jesus telling the disciples to go to a mountain. We have no idea what mountain they went to. And when we think of mountains too, we need to realize that when you talk about mountains in Israel, you're not talking about they went and climbed Mount Everest or even something like the Appalachians. You're talking about basically a hill. There's not a huge mountaintop. It would be big enough for thousands of people to sit around, but it's not a huge thing. So they're on this mountaintop. They're meeting with Jesus, but it's interesting that he's in Galilee. It says, Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee. Now, why would they go to Galilee? First off, Jesus told them to. That's always a good reason. Jesus told them to go to Galilee after he had met with them. Remember, he told Mary, Go back and tell my disciples that I've risen and I will meet them in Galilee. So now he had talked with them a few times before this, but he's going back to Galilee. Now, part of it is a lot of the disciples, that's their hometown. That's their home region. They grew up in Galilee. And so they've been fishermen there at the Sea of Galilee. So they were there and they understood this, but it's also it's interesting that a lot of the ministry of Jesus happened in Galilee. But I think there's one event that we need to understand that is different than just going to Galilee. Because Galilee really is an object lesson. Remember, Matthew is talking to the Jews. He's trying to convince the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah, not just for the Jews, but for everyone. And so they're going to Galilee, and in Isaiah, it says this: it's the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. For those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. See, we call it Galilee. Most of the Jews would have called it Galilee of the Gentiles. They would not have spent a lot of time in Galilee because the Gentiles were dogs. They were not to be reached. But this is an object lesson. Jesus is saying, and if we look at Matthew progresses along in his book from starting with the Jewish nation to expanding it out to reaching the whole world. And so Jesus is making this object lesson. It's sort of like a few weeks ago, probably a year ago now, but we were talking about in John chapter 4 when Jesus met with the woman at the well. And there, the woman at the well, he's trying to help his disciples understand that the Samaritans are not beyond reach. And so he meets with this woman. She runs back to town to tell the other townspeople. And his disciples say, hey, look, you need to eat something. You've been sitting around here in the heat. You haven't had anything to eat. And he says, well, you know what? We're not going to worry about that right now because my food is to do the will of him who sent me. And it's not that Jesus didn't eat. But at that point in time, he knew that the events that are about to happen are going to be too busy for me to eat right now. And the busyness of what's going to be happening is more important to him than eating a meal. Because what he tells the disciples, he says, you say that 4 months from now is the harvest. But I say, look. And I believe he's saying, look, and he's seeing all these people from Samaria who the Samaritan woman has gone back and said, hey, I've met the Messiah, and they're all coming to him. He goes, look, the fields are white for harvest. It's an object lesson. As these people come over the hill to come meet with Jesus and the disciples are having to be reminded that this gospel is not just for the Jews. And it's not just for them as the 12 disciples. He's saying, look over here. This is the fields that are white for harvest. And Matthew's saying the same thing. Meeting with the Galileans, meeting at Galilee of the Gentiles. That this message has to go out beyond just the nation of Israel. And so we're beginning to see Jesus' movement here. That, when in Matthew, there's really kind of 4 emphases in Matthew. One is he goes from the Jewish nation to reaching the world. He has a big emphasis on discipleship, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. He has this big emphasis on Jesus as being with them during this time. And so as we see this progression of this passage, we see these things. So he's there in Galilee of the Gentiles. He's there on a mountain. But then it says, now the 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Now, we've had 5 weeks so far of evidence pointed directly to the disciples. Mary went and told them. The other ladies came and told them. The guys who from the road to Emmaus came and told them. Jesus appeared to them twice. All of them had opportunity to see the scars on his hands and on his side. Why are they doubting? Well, let me tell you a story just to kind of give us the idea here. Many of you have heard me talk about in 1982, my father passed away. And it was a very dramatic way of passing away. It was a very hard day that afternoon. But About 6 months later, now our house, it was just my mom and I lived there, but it was a bigger house when the whole family had grown up, but now it's just my mom and I there then. My mom was up in her bedroom. I was down in my bedroom in the basement asleep. Well, during the night, I had a dream. And in this dream, my dad came back to the house and said, this was all just a joke. I really didn't die. I just kind of wanted to see how you guys would react. And I got up from my sleep. It was such a real dream that I went upstairs and went into my mom's bedroom to see if he was laying there. Now, if he'd been laying there, he would be dead that day. But he wasn't before then. Now, I didn't really doubt that he was dead. I had experienced that, but this dream was real enough that I doubted. And that's what's going on here with the disciples. It's not that they doubt the resurrection. It's not that they doubt who Jesus is, but they're coming up on this mountain and here's Jesus, and they're just kind of hesitant. Is this still real? Really, the word kind of means more the idea of being hesitant and hesitating to what's going on. Now, the issue is, who was it that was doubting? And so we see here, it seems like from the wording that it's the 11 disciples. I would disagree a little bit. Now, we don't know for sure, but I'm going to tell you what my opinion is. All right? One is it could be the disciples who some of the 11 believed and worshiped. Some of the 11 were going, I don't know about this. Or it could be that all the 11 both worshiped and doubted. They're kind of like, well, we worship him, but still, this is far-fetched. This is kind of a crazy story. Or, if you look in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul talks about Jesus appearing to 500 people at one time. Now, we don't know that 500 were here. The passage doesn't talk about 500 being there. But it also doesn't say that they weren't. It's very possible that the 11 disciples that he talks about came upon this crowd of 500 people that Jesus was already talking to. That's why they were hesitant. So far, Jesus had met personally with them in a closed room and on a beach. Now, all of a sudden, he's talking to 500 people. And they're going, we want to worship him, but what's going on? And so they come up on this crowd. Now, again, that's my opinion. I think there's some good evidence for that opinion, but the point's really not whether the 500 were there or not. The point is, many times we stand and we sing and we worship and we take communion, but there's still just something nagging. There's something that's going, I don't know about this. Seems right. In other days, it's been exciting. I've been all in. But right now, I'm a little hesitant to figure out what's going on. And so these disciples are struggling here. What are they going to do? Well, Jesus kind of helps with that hesitance and helps with that doubting when he says this. Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. Behold, I'm with you always to the end of the earth. He says, all authority has been given to me. Now, if you're hesitant about something, someone being with you who has all authority on that topic gives you a little more confidence. Now, I can remember when I was doing scuba diving training. They put you 35 feet below the surface. Now, at the time, we were in a pool. But they say, take your mask off, then put it back on and clear it so that we know if something happens, your mask gets knocked off underwater, you know how to do this. So my first time taking my mask off and the bubbles from my regulator going up my nose gave me a very panicked feeling. So I went to the surface. said, I don't know about this. So he said, well, let's try it again. You can do it. So I go back, I'm down to the bottom, take my mask off, the bubbles from my regulator go up my nose, I get panicked, I go to the top. Judy will tell you, I came home that night thinking, I'm never going to be able to get certified scuba diver. I can't do it. I'm in a panic. Now, the authority who knows how to do it is telling me, yeah, you can. Of course, she's doing this whole, well, just go home and visualize yourself doing it. So I go home and visualize myself drowning in the pool in the Bahamas. So that doesn't make it any better. But so I'm going, there should be a way of doing this. So what do? The next day I asked the authority, I said, hey, when I take the mask off, is it okay if I put my face looking down so the bubbles come here rather than up my nose? Oh, yeah. Well, then it was easy. Because the person who has the authority, the person who has the experience is telling me all authority. I have the ability. She had the ability to say yes or no whether I ever get my diving certificate. Because she knew, she'd been there, she'd done it. And Jesus is saying, all authority has been given to me. This is not some narcissistic idea of him coming and saying, well, I'm the answer man. Listen to me. No, he's saying, you know what? I'm about to send you out. And if you're doubting and struggling right now, trust me, you're being sent out with all authority. All the authority that I have. And this is not just something that Jesus came up with. Chapter 9 says this, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. He's saying, you know what? You've had your struggles with this. For 3.5 years, every time I would teach you, you would not get it. And now you've seen me in these different settings, but you're still struggling a little bit. But trust me, all authority has been given to me. And so this confidence, this boost of confidence gives them what they stand in need of to do what God's calling them to do. He says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Making disciples is not imparting a bunch of information. Next Monday, I leave to go to India and Nepal again. And so we went last time. We did a lot of training. I talked all day long. So I would talk with a translator. We take a break, talk. And so I'm just imparting information. Information overload. I told them they didn't understand the illustration, but you understand the illustration, that they were drinking water from a fire hose. And so I talked to our Nepali friend and our Indian friend when I was in Brazil a few weeks ago, and they said, we really don't need a bunch of information. We need to know how to do it. So I've told the ones who are going with me this trip, if we only cover one topic, but we cover it well and the people get it, then that's fine. Come prepared for more topics. But we may spend all of our day talking about one thing. But that's what's important, because making disciples is not seeing how much information I can give you. It's that the information changes who you are and changes who I am. And so when Jesus says go and make disciples, he's not saying go and tell everybody all that you know about the Bible. He's saying go and make people make a commitment to follow me, to be fully into doing what God's called me to do. He's given them a purpose. See, when we're afraid, when we're doubting, when we're not sure what to do, when we know we have a purpose, sometimes we can get beyond that. Sometimes we can be at a point where we don't really want to do it, but it has to be done. So we do it, and once we begin to do it, then our heart and our attitude begins to change because we begin to trust what he's doing. The Cambridge Dictionary says purpose is a determination or a feeling of having a reason for what you do. And sometimes we go to work. What's our reason for going to work? because we get bills, right? You got to get a paycheck to pay the bills. We don't really like work. We don't want to go. For some reason, we've been told over the years that work and working hard is a result of the fall. Well, that's not true. Adam was going to work in the garden. The issue is the fall just made work a little bit harder. Eve was going to have babies in the garden, but the fall made having babies a little bit harder. And so the point's not that work is bad. The point is, why do we go to work? And if we go to work just to receive a paycheck, with today's economy, that's still not even much of a motivation to go. So we've got to begin to say, what is the purpose? The Westminster Shorter Catechism says, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. As they wrote this catechism, and it's a little bit longer than this, it's just the first statement on the catechism. This was during a time where the Reformation was happening and different things were going on. And the Reformation was not just about getting rid of the Catholic Church. Matter of fact, a lot of the guys stayed around in the Catholic Church. The issue was reforming the Catholic Church to help them to see that it's no longer about, I can get you to heaven by selling you something, or I can get you to heaven if you look at me as your leader and I'm the big guy icon at the top and at the front. No, the Reformation was, Martin Luther said, it's about the priesthood of all believers. Now, Martin Luther didn't do away with the clergy by saying that. But what he was saying is the gospel and the message and the ministry is for everyone. That's why the scriptures began to be translated into the local language. Because you know what? If you didn't know how to read English, and I was the only one in this room who could read this Bible, I can tell you anything. You don't know what it says. I can tell you this is what it says, and you go, oh, okay. But Martin Luther said, no, it's got to be everyone. The priesthood of all believers. Everyone's got to have the opportunity. Everyone needs to know. R.C. Sproul says this, in the medieval church, vocation was restricted to the clergy for the most part. But in the Reformation, it was said, no, the farmer has a vocation, the banker has a vocation, and so on. God calls all of us to do different aspects of different parts in developing His kingdom. All of us are to be involved in developing His kingdom. Not just those people who get a Bible college or a seminary degree. Not just those people who have REV before their name. The issue is we're all called to make an impact. We're all called where we are. Your job, your school, everything that you do, God has a purpose for you being there. You are the person that He wants there. It may not be fun. He never promised us it was going to be fun. But He's put you where He's put you for a reason. He's put me where He's put me for a reason. And so we've got to begin to figure out what that reason is. R.C. Sproul goes on to say, what Luther was saying by the priesthood of all believers is that every believer is called to participate in the establishing and building of the kingdom of God. And excuse his wording here, but this is old wording, so don't come up to me afterwards and say you shouldn't use this terminology. Every believer, whatever work he's engaged in, banker, lawyer, Indian chief, see, that's the one everybody's going to fuss about, baker, or whatever it may be, his work should be done to the glory of God. Whatever circumstance God has you in. The chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Isaiah says it in Isaiah 43, that you were created to bring Him glory. Jesus says, all authority has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples. It wasn't just for these 511 that were there. It's for everyone. Then he goes on to say, and I am with you always to the end of the age. You know, my first time scuba diving in the ocean. You know, in a pool, that's relatively safe, right? The ocean, there's all kinds of things that can eat you while you're there. And you don't know what's going to happen. But it's very comforting that first time I go down 35, 40 feet under the surface, is that I can look across and the woman who taught me how to scuba dive is right there. She's swimming along beside me, and I know if I have trouble, all I got to do is get her attention and she'll help me. If I run out of air, I can go and I can share air with her, and we'll go to the surface and everything will be okay. So it gives a confidence. And so we're saying here, when you go to work, when you go to school, it's not that God's with you when you're here on Sunday mornings and he leaves you until you come back next Sunday. He's with you in your job. He's with you at your school. He's with you with your neighbors. He's with you in every situation. He's with you when you're playing volleyball, when you're playing baseball, when you're swimming, when you're playing soccer, whatever it is, he's with you because you're there for a reason. That reason is not just to be the best soccer player or the best volleyball player or the best employee even. The reason is to bring him glory and him honor and to reflect him to the world. That's why he's called you there. One more thing from R.C. Sproul. This means that we should be wrestling with the biblical principles that teach us how to use our gifts and talents in a way that is serviceable to God and to humanity. We should be asking on a daily basis, why me? Now, we ask that question a lot of times. When our car doesn't work, why me? When we get that bill we weren't expecting, why me? We ask that question all the time. But it's not why me in that sense. Why am I here? Why has God put me here? I can remember the very first job I had. My manager at the time, it was at a drugstore. My manager, when he hired me, it had been almost 6 months since he had had a day off. We were open every day. Sunday afternoons we opened later because of church, but we were open every day of the week. And he had not had a day off. And after I got more used to the store and he could trust me more, I said, Tim, at least every other Sunday. I know we're open on Sundays. I'm supposed to go to church. But instead of me going to church every other Sunday, I want to work so you can have that Sunday off. I realize it's only one day every 2 weeks. But I felt like that's why God had me there. Not to tell Tim I can't work on Sundays because I got to go to church. To tell Tim that you're more important than my going to church every other Sunday because I want you to understand and know Christ. And so we begin to follow after Christ. So what I want us to do, I'm going to make you work this morning. Think about your job or school or neighborhood or hobbies. All right, you got it in your mind? Shouldn't be hard. That should be a quick one. You should be able to think about those pretty quickly. Ask yourself, why am I in this place? Why does God have you there? You know, I was reading something the other day, and it's a good reminder to us. It's depressing, but it's from Ecclesiastes too. Someone said, you know what? My co-worker who sits at the desk next to me died on Monday. And on Friday, her desk had already been cleaned out and it had been posted online that the job was available. What you do, anybody can do. But not anybody can do it to the glory of the Lord. God's called you there, placed you there for a reason.